I am Emery, 34 years old, and I work as a state historical archivist. That is the only reason my family's decade-long financial fraud did not stay buried forever. Last November, I stood at a podium in a downtown Denver bookstore, ready to launch a memoir I had spent 5 years writing. I looked out at 50 metal folding chairs. 46 of them were empty. 30 minutes before the reading, my mother sent a group text, telling me my life's work was a tantrum that embarrassed the family brand. They left me standing in front of 4 strangers who had wandered in from the rain. They thought staring at an empty room would break my spirit. They had no idea my publisher had already secured a national television feature for the very next morning. By Thursday, my book hit #1 on the bestseller list. I sent each of them a signed copy. By Friday, my phone erupted with calls from the exact same relatives who had boycotted me, suddenly begging for a seat at my table. But they were too late. I already had the certified courthouse documents sitting in my briefcase. Welcome back to Aura Vengeance, where the quietest person in the room is usually the one auditing the receipts, and where walking away is the ultimate payoff. Drop a comment telling me how old you are and where you are listening from, and be sure to hit subscribe. Let me take you back to that rainy Tuesday in Denver and the text message that started the collapse of the Jones family empire. The independent bookstore off Fax Avenue smelled of old paper and damp wool. The manager, a kind woman wearing an oversized cardigan, kept glancing between the wall clock and the front door. Rain lashed against the display window. It was 10 minutes past the scheduled start time. I stood at the wooden podium, tracing the grain of the wood with my index finger. I wore a tailored navy blazer and sensible shoes. I felt steady. Archivists are trained to handle decaying, fragile things without letting them crumble in our hands. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen illuminated the dim room. A group text from my mother, Linda. Included on the thread were my sister Vanessa, my brother Julian, and Uncle David. The message read, "Emmy, we are not coming. Your little hobby is deeply embarrassing to the family brand. Please do not expect us to validate this tantrum." I stared at the glowing white text bubble. A decade ago, a message like that would have sent me into a spiral. I would have drafted a dozen replies, begging for their approval. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I looked at the 4 strangers waiting patiently in the front row. Their coats were dripping onto the hardwood floor. I cleared my throat, opened my book to chapter 1, and began to read. When the hour finished, I signed 4 copies. I thanked the manager, walked out into the cold Denver rain, and drove the turnpike back to Boulder. The dashboard clock glowed green in the dark cabin. The rhythm of the windshield wipers gave me time to think. The core conflict was not that my mother, sister, brother, and uncle failed to show up. It was the calculated arrogance behind their absence. They wanted me to look out at a sea of empty chairs and feel small. They assumed my silence on the drive home was the silence of a defeated woman. They were wrong. The empty room merely confirmed the thesis of my entire book. They went asleep that Tuesday night, believing they had successfully suffocated my voice. They had no idea that while they were sleeping, a producer for a national morning show in New York was staying up late, turning the pages of my advanced copy and picking up the phone to call my publisher. I woke up the next morning to the sound of dry snow scraping against my bedroom window. Boulder winters always arrive early and quiet. I walked into the kitchen, measured out the coffee grounds, and waited for the machine to drip. My phone sat face down on the granite counter. It vibrated, then it vibrated again. A few seconds later, it began a continuous, unbroken hum that rattled the ceramic mug sitting next to it. I flipped the device over. I expected to see another condescending message from my mother, perhaps doubling down on her refusal to attend the launch. Instead, the screen was flooded with notifications from my publisher. There were 12 missed calls from my literary agent. At the top of the stack was a text message containing a single video link and a note that read, "Turn on your television right now." I clicked the link. It directed me to a clip from the highest-rated morning talk show in New York. The host, a woman known for her sharp literary critiques, was holding up a copy of my memoir. She was not just reviewing it. She was dissecting it with fierce admiration. She praised the clinical, detached way I documented familial gaslighting. She read a paragraph aloud, the exact paragraph I had read to 4 strangers in an empty Denver bookstore just hours prior. She called the book a masterclass in boundary setting. By the time I finished watching the 3-minute segment, the clip already had 500,000 views online. The narrative shifted before I even had a chance to pour my coffee. For 5 years, my family had controlled the story. They painted me as the dramatic, troubled younger sister who could not let go of the past. In less than 24 hours, a national audience had validated my reality. The momentum did not stop there. By Wednesday evening, the sky over the Flatirons had turned a bruised purple. I was sitting at my dining table, cataloging a stack of digitized state census records when my editor called. She did not bother with pleasantries. She told me the morning show feature had triggered a tidal wave of pre-orders. The publishing house was already rushing a second printing. Then she delivered the final blow. "We hit the list," she said, her voice tight with disbelief. #1 on the New York Times nonfiction list. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and let the silence of my apartment wash over me. I did not scream or jump around the room. I felt a cold, deep clarity settle into my chest. I grabbed my car keys and drove to a local print shop on Pearl Street. The store smelled of fresh ink and cardboard. I walked down the shipping aisle and picked out 4 distinct heavy-duty padded mailers. I wanted the packaging to feel substantial, something that could not be easily ignored or thrown away. I carried them to the counter, paid, and took them out to my car, sitting in the driver's seat under the pale glow of a street lamp. I pulled 4 pristine copies of my memoir from a cardboard box in the passenger seat. I opened the front cover of each book. I clicked my pen. I did not write a long, emotional letter. I did not ask for apologies or demand explanations. I wrote 1 single sentence on each title page. "Thanks for the inspiration." I signed my name, slid the books into the padded mailers, and addressed them to Linda, Vanessa, Julian, and Uncle David. I dropped them into the blue postal box on the corner. The metal door clanged shut with a heavy, satisfying thud. I expected silence. I assumed they would receive the books, throw them in the trash, and continue pretending I did not exist. I underestimated their opportunism. Friday morning, the whiplash arrived. My phone rang at 8 a.m. The caller ID flashed my brother's name, Julian. Julian is 36. A commercial real estate developer who wears custom Italian suits and drives a leased European sports car. He is the golden boy, the one who never does any wrong, the one who supposedly built a self-made empire. "Emmy," he exclaimed, his voice dripping with an artificial enthusiasm that made my skin crawl. "Congratulations, #1, we are all so incredibly proud of you." I listened, my face expressionless. As he launched into a 5-minute monologue about how he always knew I had it in me, how this was just the beginning, and how the family was planning a huge celebration dinner. He even suggested a joint venture. A Jones family brand literary imprint. I let him ramble, picturing the padded mailer sitting on his polished mahogany desk. "That's generous, Julian," I finally said, cutting him off. "But I think I'll pass on the joint venture and the dinner." His voice faltered. "But why? This is a family triumph." "Is it?" I asked, my voice flat. "Because last Tuesday it was an embarrassing tantrum." A beat of silence. "Emmy, you know how Mom gets," he stammered, trying to pivot. "She was just worried about the family image. You know, with the old stuff." "The old stuff," I echoed. "You mean the financial fraud that nearly ruined my life and left me shouldering predatory loans for a business I didn't own?" He cleared his throat. "Look, let's not get into ancient history. The point is, you're a success now. We're all family. Let's celebrate." "I'm celebrating just fine," I replied. "Alone." I hung up before he could respond. The phone immediately rang again. It was Vanessa. Then Uncle David. Then my mother, Linda, her voice thick with fake tears, telling me how much she missed me, how proud she was. And how she was so worried about my well-being after my little breakdown a decade ago. Each call was a variation of the same theme: feigned support, thinly veiled attempts to re-establish control, and desperate pleas for me to re-enter their orbit. They wanted to bask in my reflected glory, to claim a piece of my success, and most importantly, to ensure my silence. They were panicking. My book, a raw, honest account of my struggle to escape their manipulative clutches and rebuild my life, had gone national. It wasn't just a memoir. It was an exposé, albeit one that carefully avoided direct accusations. But the subtext was clear for anyone who knew our family. The gaslighting, the boundary setting, the toxic financial entanglement, it all pointed to them. They realized that my story, now validated by millions, had the potential to unravel their carefully constructed facade. They were no longer dealing with the quiet, intimidated young woman they had once controlled. They were dealing with a New York Times best-selling author, an archivist who knew how to dig, and a woman who had nothing left to lose. The phone calls continued all day Friday. I let most of them go to voicemail. I spent the afternoon at my desk, not celebrating, but meticulously organizing the documents I had retrieved earlier that week. The truth was, the book was just the first shot across the bow. The real battle was about to begin. The old stuff Julian had dismissed as ancient history was very much alive in my briefcase. The family's financial fraud, a complex web of shell corporations, inflated property values, and predatory loans that had left me financially devastated in my early 20s was all there. I had spent years, quietly, patiently, using my skills as an archivist to unearth every single piece of evidence. I had accessed probate records, municipal tax filings, and property deeds, all under the guise of standard verification for state historical projects. They thought I was writing a tantrum. I was actually building a case. That Saturday, the calls stopped. The silence was almost more unsettling than the constant ringing. I knew what it meant. They had shifted tactics. Julian, with his network of old fraternity connections embedded throughout the state government, would be working behind the scenes. They would be trying to find a way to discredit me, to silence me, to make me regret ever publishing my story. I was ready. On Monday morning, I drove to the state archives in Denver, the same building where I had spent countless hours researching their fraud. I pulled the restricted property deeds from 2012, the final pieces of the puzzle. The counterattack was coming, and since they could no longer manipulate my emotions, they were going to target the only thing I had left to lose, my career. The drive back to Boulder felt different. The air inside the cabin of my car was no longer thick with grief or suffocating guilt. It felt light, charged with the electric current of absolute certainty. I had the certified documents resting in my leather briefcase on the passenger seat. The mechanism of the fraud was exposed. The narrative my family had relied on for over a decade was officially dead. I arrived at my apartment just past noon. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, arranged the certified records across my dining table, and prepared to draft an outline for a forensic audit report. I intended to structure the evidence the same way I would build a historical timeline for the state: clean, chronological, and devastating. My phone vibrated on the counter. The caller ID displayed the main extension for the regional director of the State Historical Archives, my direct supervisor. I assumed the call was regarding a routine scheduling conflict or a question about the upcoming quarterly archival review. I pressed the accept icon and held the device to my ear. "Good afternoon, Arthur," I said, preparing to pull up my work calendar. "Emery," my supervisor replied. His voice lacked its usual bureaucratic warmth. It sounded clipped, tense, and deeply uncomfortable. "I need you to close out of any active state databases you are currently accessing." My hand hovered over my laptop keyboard. "Is there a server issue?" "There is an active human resources issue," Arthur stated, the words sounding heavy and rehearsed, as if he were reading from a prepared script provided by legal counsel. "The department received a formal anonymous complaint this morning. The filing alleges severe professional misconduct. Specifically, it states you are utilizing restricted municipal clearance codes to access sealed civic records for personal financial gain, likely tied to the publication of your recent commercial book." The blood drained from my face. The room spun for a fraction of a second. "That is entirely false," I countered, my voice tight. I accessed probate records this morning under the purview of standard verification. I cannot discuss the details of the allegations, Emery. Arthur interrupted, cutting off my defense. The complaint was escalated above my level. It was routed directly to the State Ethics Oversight Committee. Due to the sensitive nature of your clearance and the severity of the accusations, protocol mandates immediate action. I stared at the certified documents scattered across my table. The trap was springing shut. Effective immediately, you are placed on mandatory administrative leave, Arthur continued. His tone offered no sympathy. Your login credentials for all municipal servers have been suspended. Your physical access badge has been deactivated. You are prohibited from entering any state facility or contacting department personnel until the formal investigation concludes. They deactivated my badge. They froze my access to the archives. Arthur ended the call with a curt instruction to await an email from the Oversight Committee. The line went dead. I set the phone down. The sheer speed of the retaliation was breathtaking. It had been less than 4 hours since I pulled the microfilm spools from the sub-level vault in Denver. The junior paralegal in the records department had not just made a casual phone call to Uncle David. He triggered a coordinated scorched earth counterattack. My family realized I was digging. The panic that gripped them the night my book hit the bestseller list had metastasized into vicious, calculated aggression. Julian was a master of leveraging invisible networks. He did not build his commercial real estate firm through honest competition. He built it through backroom handshakes, lucrative kickbacks, and exploiting a deep roster of old fraternity connections embedded throughout the state government. One phone call to the right mid-level bureaucrat in the ethics department was all it took to manufacture a bogus HR complaint. They engineered a scenario designed to paralyze me. The threat was not subtle. It was a glaring neon sign flashing a singular ultimatum: back off or we will systematically dismantle the life you built. They intended to strip away my career, tarnish my spotless professional reputation, and freeze the state pension I had spent 12 years earning. They wanted to sever my primary source of income and isolate me from my professional support system. They designed the pressure to be immense. Crushing, the goal was regression. They wanted to force me backward, reducing the confident, capable archivist into the small, powerless 20-year-old girl who cried on the velvet sofa and signed whatever paper Uncle David handed her. I walked over to the window and looked down at the street below. A cold afternoon rain was beginning to fall, slicking the pavement. In the past, a threat to my livelihood would have terrified me. I would have folded. I would have sent the apologetic email and surrendered. But looking at the rain, I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. My family was operating under an outdated playbook. They assumed a war of attrition would break me. They believed that because they possessed superior financial resources, deep political connections, and expensive lawyers, they could simply outlast my resolve. They hoped I would run out of money, panic, and beg for a truce before the state investigation ruined my name. They thought I was playing defense. I turned away from the window and walked back to the dining table, where the certified documents lay waiting. They had made a critical miscalculation. They had underestimated the power of an archivist with nothing left to lose. They had taken away my access to the state archives, but they couldn't take away the evidence I already possessed. They thought they were dismantling my life, but they were merely accelerating their own downfall. The HR complaint, designed to paralyze me, instead liberated me. Now, with my career on hold, I had all the time in the world to focus on one thing: exposing them. The next morning, I drafted a formal response to the State Ethics Oversight Committee, detailing the true nature of my family's financial activities, complete with the certified documents and a timeline of their fraud. I didn't just defend myself, I went on the offensive. I also contacted a pro bono legal aid society specializing in financial fraud cases. They were thrilled to take on a case with such clear evidence and a New York Times best-selling author as a client. The media, already interested in my story, would be even more so when the full scope of the fraud came to light. The anonymous complaint that had been designed to silence me instead became the catalyst for their public exposure. The state investigation, initially aimed at me, quickly pivoted to my family. Julian's carefully cultivated network of connections began to unravel. The mid-level bureaucrats he had once manipulated now faced scrutiny themselves. Uncle David, the architect of the fraud, found his past dealings under a microscope. Vanessa's carefully curated online persona, built on a foundation of inherited wealth, started to crack as questions about the source of that wealth emerged. And my mother, Linda, the matriarch who had dismissed my book as a tantrum, found her family brand collapsing around her. The legal proceedings were long and arduous, but the evidence was irrefutable. The certified documents, meticulously gathered over years, painted a damning picture. The media, fueled by the success of my memoir, followed every twist and turn. My family, who had once prided themselves on their untouchable image, became a public spectacle. Julian's real estate empire crumbled under the weight of investigations into illicit kickbacks and fraudulent property deals. Uncle David faced multiple charges of financial misconduct. Vanessa's social media empire imploded as her followers questioned the authenticity of her lavish lifestyle. And Linda, who had always prioritized the family brand above all else, watched as that brand was irrevocably tarnished. The consequences were severe. Julian and Uncle David faced significant legal repercussions. Their assets were frozen, their businesses dissolved, and their reputations destroyed. Vanessa, stripped of her financial backing, was forced to confront the reality of a life without inherited wealth. My mother, Linda, tried every trick in the book, from feigned illness to emotional manipulation, but the legal system, unlike her youngest daughter, was immune to her theatrics. In the end, I didn't just get justice, I got peace. The financial compensation I received from the settlement helped me rebuild my life, free from the burden of their past actions. More importantly, I broke free from their emotional manipulation. I learned that true strength comes not from inherited wealth or manufactured image, but from integrity, resilience, and the courage to speak your truth, even when it means standing alone. My family's downfall was a painful, public spectacle, but it was a necessary one. It exposed the rot at the core of their family brand and forced them to confront the consequences of their actions. For me, it was the ultimate validation, a testament to the power of a quiet archivist who dared to audit the receipts. Linda, my mother, failed to instill emotional awareness because she possessed none herself. She viewed emotions as tools for leverage. When the truth finally cornered her, she did not offer genuine remorse or seek to understand the decade of pain she inflicted upon her youngest daughter. Instead, she manufactured a fake cardiac emergency to exploit my empathy. When the legal trap snapped shut in the boardroom, she weaponized her tears, crying out, "I am your mother," as if that biological title granted her immunity from the consequences of her cruelty. Parenting is not a title you can hide behind when the bill comes due. It is a daily practice of accountability. If you lie to your children to protect them from discomfort, you destroy their resilience. If you lie with your children to protect a societal image, you corrupt their souls. You teach them that the people sitting across the dinner table are not a support system, but rather assets to be managed or liabilities to be discarded. We must ask ourselves what kind of legacy we are truly leaving behind. Are we leaving behind a brittle facade of wealth that requires constant, exhausting maintenance to uphold? Or are we leaving behind a legacy of quiet integrity? The children we raise today will eventually step out into a world that does not care about the artificial narratives we spin in our living rooms. The world will test their structural integrity. It will apply pressure to their foundations. If we have not filled their core with honesty, empathy, and a steadfast commitment to fairness, they will collapse under the weight of their own hollow choices. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever sat at a family gathering and realized the people smiling across the table are holding ledger books instead of open hearts, or if you have had to build your own fortress out of the stones others threw at you, you are not walking that path alone. We are building a community of people who recognize that true justice often comes from simply shining a light on the hidden rot. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about the boundaries you have had to draw and follow the channel aura of vengeance for more stories of quiet resilience and ultimate truth. As you turn off your screen tonight and listen to the quiet settling of your own home, take a moment to reflect on the chairs gathered around your dining table. Think about the conversations that happen there, the expectations that linger in the air, and the silent lessons being absorbed by the next generation. A family can be a sanctuary, or it can be a syndicate. The difference is rarely announced with a shout. It is usually decided in the quiet, unseen moments, in the choices we make when we think no one is watching, and in the truths we are willing to face when the illusion finally fades. Look closely at the foundation you are standing on. Ask yourself if it is built on solid stone or if it is merely waiting for the rain to wash the dirt away.